Hilchis Keilim Perik Sheni. Ha'oisa klei kibul mikol mokim, hareze mekabel tuma bekol shu min atera. Ve'en leklei kibul shir. If a person makes a klei kibul, so regardless of how large the klei kibul is, but as long as it's a klei kibul, it's mekabel tuma. V'hu sheyasu davar shel kayomish ef sheyamet. But on the other hand, it has to be something which could last. And there's something which, as the Rambam will say, an example, if you hollow out an esrog, so therefore it's really not going to last to remain as a kli kibul. So therefore it doesn't have a din of a kli kibul. But if we're dealing with something that will last, so even though it's very, very small, the Rambam will say even a drop of water, it can only contain a drop of water, but nevertheless, it's mekabel tuma, it's considered a kli kibul. Now the lashon of the Rambam is a oisa kli kibul mikol mokim. Now, mikol makom doesn't mean from any material, because we learned earlier in Perek Aleph that a kli glolim, kli avonim, kli adama are material which is not mekabel tuma. And even if you have a kli kibul, these materials are not mekabel tuma. So when Pirush Mishnayos, when it starts in the Mishnah, mikol makom means, for example, if there's a oir is leather. So even if we're dealing with oir, which he says oir, like it says right now, oir matzah, which means oir leather, which knows the hide, raw hide, which wasn't at all processed to become leather. Nevertheless, if you take this raw hide and you make a kli kibul out of it, or as he's going to say, you take paper, which also is not something be'etzem is mekabel tumah on its own, but you go ahead and you make a kli kibul from it, but it grows from the ground. So therefore, it's considered, it's also mekabel tumah. That's what the Rambam is being madgish with the word mikol makom. So it's a kli kibul mikol makom, and then he says it's a kol shu. Ketzat. Ha'isa Keilim and ha'er hamatzah. Someone that makes a keli from hide, which matzah means that shleinis abit klal, like the Rambam teaches, is something which wasn't at all started the processing of becoming leather. Oimen haniyar. So in niyar we normally touch paper, but over here it means niyar. They used to take like certain grasses, just like we have the concept of levet, which is you take wool and you press it together, and it becomes a material without spinning it, without weaving it. Becomes a material through pressing it together. So in the same way, they would take certain grasses and they would press it together, and then it would become niyar. So even though those grasses be'etzem aren't really something which have any din of tumah, it's not a din of a garment or anything, but nevertheless, when you take those grasses which grow from the ground and you make a keli from it, so in Mele it's considered a keli and it's mekabel a kli kibul, so it's mekabel tumah. That's what he's saying. Ketzah. Ha'isa Keilim and ha'er hamatzah. You make a keli out of hide which wasn't processed. Shleinis abit klal. Eimen haniyar, or from niyar, which means pieces of grass which were pressed together. Aval pisha ein haniyar mekabel tumah. The niyar itself, before you made it into a kli kibul, wouldn't be mekabel tumah. Ein meklipas harimein va'eges v'ha'alin. You take the shells of a pomegranate or a nut or an aloin, which are all hard shells, and therefore they could be a receptacle, they could have a dvar kiyum. And afilu chokukum hatinoikis lamed b'misafer. The person, the one that made it into a receptacle, wasn't an adult; it was a tinoikis. And lechura, the das of a tinoikis doesn't really have a din of das. Or sheiskinum lekaf miznaim, or they prepared it to be the pans of a scale. So in other words, their pans also are receptacles. You prepared those to be the pans of a scale. Is hare elu mekabel tumah. Why? Aylechura, you need the das to make it into a kli kibul, and the tinekas don't have a din of das. Shetinek chereshet v'kotni yesh le'maisa aval pisha ein le'machshava. So when they do an act, and from that act it's clear what the intent is, that they're interested in using it as a keli, as a kli kibul. So therefore it has a din of a kli kibul. So Bekitzer was saying that if a person goes ahead and makes something into a kli kibul, even it's a small kli kibul, nevertheless it has a din of a keli. If it's talking about the materials that have a din of a keli, it has a din of a keli, and therefore it's mekabel tumah, even if it's very minimalistic, very little amount of kli kibul. That's talking about when we're dealing with materials which could last, which he gave an example of er matzah, gave an example of a niyar, and he gave the example of klipas harim and vegas v'alin. Avol ha'isa kelim min halefes, from a turnip, over an esrog and adlas is squash. Hayaveshim shechokakom, which you hollowed it out, lamed behem, in order to use it as a measuring vessel. V'chol kiyetzbem, so eventually it'll very quickly dry out and become uiskeli. Is harei and teirim ufi she'efshe sheyamdol is mamut. their life, they could only remain for a very short amount of time because they'll dry out and shrivel up. In other words, the other Keilim, Klipas, Harimin, Va'eges, will remain for a while. Masha'inkin, these things, a turnip, an esrig, or a squash, will dry out quickly, and therefore they won't be a Keilim, even if you make it into a Kli Kibul, since it's not something which could have a Kiyum, so therefore it doesn't have a din of a Keilim. Halacha base. Knei Moiznayim, the rod, in other words, you have a scale. A scale would work. There would be a rod descending, let's say, from the ceiling, and then there would be a horizontal rod, and from those horizontal rods, you had the chains that came down with the pans to have the scale and to measure and to weigh whether or not, the two sides of the scale. So now, on that rod, sometimes, that's from Pirish Mishnayos Laram, they would hollow out the rod and able to put metal into that rod, and the purpose was really to deceive the buyer. In other words, since he had metal in the rod, so therefore it was being noita to one side. What really should be is that it should be equal. You put a weight on one side of the rod, and then you could see whether or not. So that's how you weigh what's going on the other side of the rod. You put the weight on one pan, and then you put whatever material is being sold or bought on the other side of the pan. But if you put a weight in the rod, so then it'll shift, and then you won't really see exactly the proper weight of the things you're measuring. That's one reason why you would hollow out. Because it would be a initial gneva. You would hollow out this rod to put metal in it. That's one option. And then there's a metzias of a machak. Machak is a piece of wood that you would use in order to straighten out. If you're selling someone, let's say, flour or something, and you want to, so when you fill up the bowl with flour, so the flour is overflowing the bowl, so you have a stick to go and straighten it out. Now, if that stick is heavier, it's a heavier stick, so then it'll flatten it out and you'll leave less in the bowl. If it's a lighter stick, so then you'll leave more in the bowl. So if you want to, let's say you're the seller and you want to leave less in the bowl, so again, you're going to put a weight into this rod that you're going to use to flatten out the bowl in order to leave less in the bowl. That's so knei moiznayim. If you have this rod that you use for a weight, or v'hamachak, or you have this rod that you're using in order to straighten out the keli that you're selling with, sheyesh b'hem beis kibul matches. There's a place in this rod to be able to put a piece of metal in there. Or v'ha'esel, you have an esel is also a stick, which let's say you're carrying a sack you're carrying a sack. So you put the stick on you put the sack, you connect it to the end of this esel, to this stick, and then you put the stick over your shoulder, v'esel. In this esel, there's a place to hold your money, Or v'kanishalet, so you have a stick of wood for whatever reason. There's a place to put water in there. Or a makel, you have a stick. You have a stick that you're walking with a stick, and you have a place to put a mezuzah in there, or you have a place to put a pearl in there. It's a place of a hiding place. Possibly the pearl is for a hiding place. Mezuzah is not so clear why you're walking around with a mezuzah, but I'll call upon them. You have a stick, sheyesh bebeis kibul mezuzah, and became margolis. Or a mashchezah shalates, you have a sharpener, a wooden sharpener, sheyesh bebeis kibul shemen, but it has within this wooden sharpener, there's a place to put a little oil, because sometimes you need to sharpen you need a little oil. Or veluach pinkas, if you have a tablet, a writing tablet, of a sheyesh bebeis kibul shaiva, you have over there a place to hold some wax in order to use for the writing. Is kol elu kiyetzebem, aval pi shehem pshutik lietz. Initially, be'etzem, we're dealing with things that are not really a beis kibul. In other words, the knei moiznayim, the machak, all these things are not really a beis kibul. That's not really what they're about. Aber hel v'yeshbem beis kibul koshu, is within them. There's a beis kibul. In other words, the knei moiznayim is not really a beis kibul. But on the other end, in the knei moiznayim, there's a place to hold matches. In the esel, there's a place to hold mois, etc. Is hel v'yeshbem beis kibul koshu. So therefore, mekabel tumah din teira. So it's also a din that a beis kibul. Normally, you could think that maybe a beis kibul means if the keli is miyuchad for being a beis kibul. Over here, the keli is not a beis kibul. The keli is a difference, just a pshutik lietz. But in that keli, there's a beis kibul. So the din is hail v'yeshbem beis kibul koshu. There's a shtickle beis kibul, and therefore mekabel tumah din teira. Now ve'ein tomim min teira el beis kibul levadei sheyeshbem. only the actual base kibble, which is part of this rod or part of this kana, whatever, that part that has the base kibble, that's really the part that's makabel tumah minatera, and also v'hamishamish is base hakibble mishara kelish base hakibble tzorichle. So in other words, the base kibble itself and whatever part of the rest of it, which is really needed for the base kibble. In other words, you can't just have the base kibble, so you have to have some type of an extension to this base kibble. So the part of the extension to the base kibble, which is necessary to hold this base kibble, so that would be tzorichle. For example, if you have a stick, and that stick, you have a long stick that you use to carry a sack on the back of you, and in that stick, there's a place for money. So there's a place for money. So that area where there's the place for money, that's a base kibble, and that part of it can't be just that area. It has to have some type of a holder, that area. So that's also considered like a yad to that base kibble. But the rest of the stick, which is being used to carry the package which you're carrying behind your back, which is a long stick, that part of it is not neged to that base kibble. Only the part of that's neged, the handle of that base kibble. So that's Torah Minatera. That's Torah Minatera. Because the Rambam said before that Pshuti Kliyates, even though Minatera they are not Mekabel Tumah, but nevertheless, Midrabona they're Mekabel Tumah. That's what the Rambam said earlier. Later on in Perek Dalet, the Rambam is going to discuss when Pshuti Kliyates is actually Mekabel Tumah Midrabona. But here the Rambam is saying Beifin Stomi that these items which are not L'tzorich of the Beis Kibul, they're talking out Mekabel Tumah Minatera, but on the other end they're Mekabel Tumah Midivrei. Halacha Gimel. So we learned again a base kibble, something that has a base kibble. So that's considered a keli. That's for sure considered a keli, regardless of the size of the base kibble, and therefore it's makabel tumah minatera. Now base kibble haosi limalese. Because you have something which has a place to put something in there, but when you speak about a base kibble, normally you mean something you're going to put something in and you're going to take it out. Whereas it's something to hold something, so which means you're going to put it in, you're going to put it out. What happens if you have something that could hold something, but the purpose is not to put it in or put it out. You're going to put something in there, and that's where it's going to remain. So Memela, that's really going to become part of this object. It's not going to be a base kibble, which is receiving and taking. So that's what I'm saying. Base kibble or osil malese, a base kibble, which you have a piece of wood, and that piece of wood has a place, a receptacle. But the purpose of this receptacle is to fill it up and it to remain filled. So then, any base kibble, that's not called a base kibble. A base kibble is only if something is there to put something in and to take it out. Ketzah. Because shel eitz, you have a piece of wood, shechoike can buy base kibble, which you engrave in this piece of wood, a base kibble, a receptacle, and v'toikim by hasadin shel barzel, the smith that has this metal, this piece of metal that he needs to work on, this piece of metal that he works on. So he puts this piece of metal into this base kibble, into this piece of wood that has this chaykikim ba base kibble, and that's where he works on. He works on that metal, so he doesn't have such a large piece of metal. He has a piece of metal that he wants to work on, and that piece of metal is within this piece of wood, and that's where it remains. So it depends. Im shel nafachim, if he's a smith, an iron smith, so in Mela, see, there's no reason for him to ever pick up this piece of metal. He's going to be working on this piece of metal. When he's going to be banging the iron on this piece of metal, is Eina Mekabel Stumah. So this piece, this eighth, which holds this piece of metal, is not considered a klei kibble, because lepel, even though it holds a piece of metal, but that piece of metal is there to stay, so therefore the piece of wood is not called Mekabel Stumah. Sha'aval pi sheyesh b'beis kibble, even though this piece of wood has a beis kibble, you put the metal in there. The purpose of the beis kibble is not to put something in and take something out. It's only to fill it up and leave it there. That's talking about if we're dealing with an ironsmith. However, if it was a person that was, let's say, a goldsmith or a silversmith, so in other words, he's working with gold and silver. So over there, when a little bit of the powder of the gold or the silver comes off, when he's working on this gold and silver, sees that the gold and silver is very expensive. So therefore he wants to save that gold or silver. So what he's going to do is he's going to pick up this metal and go ahead and gather whatever dust of the gold and silver fell under the metal and preserve it and keep it. So he will be taking the metal out and putting it back in. So therefore, this doesn't go into a gather of a keli which is osil malese because he's taking it in and taking it out. So therefore, in that situation, when he's a tzerif of a goldsmith or a silversmith, so then it is mekabel tumah. That's what he's saying. If it was something that was done by tzerfim, they pick up this piece of metal, they go ahead and always gather the dust of the gold and silver which fell under this piece of metal. So then this clay kibble, this piece of wood has a clay kibble which is not the Kabbalah. You're putting something in, you're putting something out. First of all, you're putting the dust of the gold and silver in, and you're also taking the metal out. So therefore, it is Mekabel Tumah. Halacha Daled. Hakaf hachokuk shetachas ragli hamita v'hamigdolus u'kiyeitzber. Because you have a bed or a chest, and you have legs to the bed or a chest, and you want that those legs shouldn't go into the ground. So therefore, you put like a kaf normally is translated as a spoon. In other words, you put something that looks like a spoon, like the end of a spoon, and that in order for the legs to go into that hollowed out piece of wood, there's a piece of wood that's hollowed out, and that's used as a protector for the legs to stand on that piece of wood, on that hollowed out piece of wood. So in reality, since it's a hollowed out piece of wood, so it could be a receptacle, and it's really, you're putting this leg in it. But you're not really putting the leg in there for this wood to have the leg in it. You're really interested in protecting the leg, that the leg shouldn't go onto the floor. So therefore, you put this piece of wood under it, this hollow piece of wood, which is called this piece of wood, which is like a hollowed out piece of wood, in order to be able to support this leg, and that's how you do it. So therefore, this is not called a receptacle. Again, halacha dalet hakaf hachokuk. Shetachas ragli hamitis v'hamigdolus ukiyeitzben. You have a chokuk means it's carved out into this kaf. In other words, you have a piece of wood that's carved out like a spoon, and that's under the feet of a bed or of a chest ukiyeitzben. Is afal pi shehu mekabel be'etzem l'chura. This carved out piece of wood that's called the kaf, this hollowed out piece of wood, is mekabel. But nevertheless, it's torah. Ve'eim mishum kli kibul. It doesn't have a din of a kli kibul. It's not here to hold, in other words, for you to put something in there. The whole purpose over there is only in order to support the bed or the chest. So therefore, it's not called a clay kibble. That's the number one. Then the Rambam continues, if you have a straw, and a straw which is closed on one side, so therefore it could be a receptacle. In other words, it's something which is hollow, is mekabelas tumah. Kol kliyetz mekabelas tumah. Shemekabel tumah. In other words, a straw is something that grows from the ground, it's hollow, and you put something in order for it to be able that it shouldn't go out. It's closed on one side, so it's mekabel tumah. Kol kliyetz mekabel tumah. Afila eni yechel lekabel tibachas. Even if you could only take one drop of water, it's very small. But we said before that there's no shear of how large the receptacle has to be. That's talking about a shveferes hakash. Now, shveferes hakona shechotcha lekabel. If you have, let's say, a reed which you cut open in order to be able to put things in this reed, so you cut it. You cut it in the length. You cut it in the length like 2 half a pipes. Shveferes hakona shechotcha lekabel. Eine mekabelas tumah, won't be mekabel tumah. Achiyetzi is called alav shebetecha. Knows the reed has white liquid in it, the white material in it. So therefore, first you have to hollow out that white material from the reed, and then, only then, could it be a receptacle. And if the purpose of cutting this reed wasn't in order for it to receive, so you just have this reed which was cut even if it was cut, but it wasn't really cut with the intent of using it lekabbalah, is harei kipshuta kliyetz. So it has a of pshuta kliyetz, because even though it really theoretically could be kabbalah, but since it wasn't cut lekabbalah, so it doesn't have a din of a klei kibul. Avol shveifer shel pakues ukiyeitzben. Pakues is translated as gall. As gall, it's a type of food. Einam Keilim el ke'echel menchshuvim, and therefore, so even though it's hollow and therefore it could be a receptacle, but nevertheless, since it's food, so therefore it's not considered a klei kibul. Halacha hey, shveiferes shechotcha, v'nosen bois hamezuzah. You have a shveiferes, a reed, which you cut, and you put the mezuzah in it. And now, at this point in time, the shveiferes has a din of a keli. V'achar kach nosno b'kesel. And then you went ahead and put the shveiferes in the wall. Now, we're talking about that there was an indentation in the wall, and therefore you were able to put the mezuzah inside there. You didn't have to attach the mezuzah to the wall and bang it in there. There was an indentation in the wall. The shveiferes was already in this, the mezuzah was already in the shveiferes, so the shveiferes had a din of a keli, and now you put it in the wall. V'achar kach nosnu b'kesel. So afilu nosnu shalei derech kabbalasa, even though lepel right now, the way it's standing in the wall, the shveiferes can't really be makabel. No, the mezuzah is only standing there because of the wall, but the shveiferes itself is standing in a position, and in order for the shveiferes to be makabel, it has to have that the opening is towards the top. Masha'inkim right now is in a position where it really can't be makabel. Nevertheless, makabel is tumah because lepel you put it in, you put this mezuzah into the shveiferes before you put it on the wall. So maybe the shveiferes already had a din of a keli, and lepel it's not really attached to the wall, so therefore it could always be turned over. So maybe even though right now it's in a position where it's really not royal lekabbalah, but lepel it still retains its din of being a kli kibul. That's talking about again you put the mezuzah in the shveiferes before you put it in the wall. Now, cover b'kaisel. What happens if you didn't just put it in the wall? You actually attached it to the wall. So here, im cover keder kabbalasa. If you put it in the wall in a way that in its position right now, it could be a makabel, is a reason makabel stuma because it had a din of a keli, and even though you attached it to the wall, it didn't lose its din keli because it could still act as a functioning keli. If now you attached it to the wall in a way that right now it can't be used as a functioning keli, so therefore tahira. So notice it had a din of a keli, but now you attach it to the wall, and now it can't be used as a keli, so therefore it's tahira. Now that's talking about, we're talking about over here that you put the mezuzah in the shveiferes before you attach it to the wall. However, nosen the shveiferes bekesel. V'achakach nosen bois hamezuzah. First you put the shveiferes, you attach it, you put it in the wall, and then you put the mezuzah in there. So as I say, im hoise keder kabbalasa. Notice you have a shveiferes which is lying in the wall. It's not attached to the wall; it's lying in the wall. Then you put a mezuzah in the shveiferes. So really, lepel, if it's keder kabbalasa, so then the shveiferes is holding the mezuzah. And the fact that the shveiferes is in the wall doesn't change anything. Lepel, the shveiferes is asi lekabbalah. So therefore, im hoise keder kabbalasa is arezah mekabelas tuma. However, shalei keder kabbalasa. So really, the shveiferes never really became a keli because the shveiferes is right now in a position where it's not able to be makabel, and you're just putting the mezuzah. The mezuzah is really on the wall. The wall, the shveiferes is maybe protecting it a little bit, but the shveiferes is not really the klei kibul for the mezuzah. So therefore, it's tahira. In cover b'kesel, if you were kaveh the shveiferes in the kesel before you put the mezuzah in it, is afilu keder kabbalos. Even if somehow or another you're able to put the mezuzah into the shveiferes keder kabbalasa, but nevertheless it's tahira, because once the shveiferes was attached to the wall before it had a din keli, so the fact that now you're putting the mezuzah in the shveiferes is not going to make it into a keli, because since it was already attached to the wall, it can't have a din keli. So because we have three situations over here. We have a situation where you have a shveiferes that you put a mezuzah in, you put a mezuzah in the shveiferes, and then if you put it in the wall, so regardless of how it is, it always retains its din of being a keli. If you attach it to the wall, so depending if it's right now still roy to be makabel, so then it still retains its din keli. Masha'inkin, if it's not royal makabel, so then it doesn't have a din of a keli. That's the case when you had the mezuzah in the shveiferes before you put before you connected it to the wall. Now you're talking about a shveiferes that you put in the wall before you put a mezuzah in. So if it's not attached to the wall and it's roy to be makabel shveiferes, and knows its position in a way where it could be makabel shveiferes. So now when you put the mezuzah in the shveiferes, which is in the wall, but lepel it's roy lekabel, its position in the way that it's makabel, so that at that point in time the shveiferes becomes a din keli. Masha'inkin, if you connect the shveiferes to the wall before you ever put the mezuzah in, so then that shveiferes loses its din keli, and now it's attached to the wall. So the fact that you're going to put the mezuzah in is not going to make it into a keli. Halacha vov. Keli she'ergenese minam nesorim iminam sham. Because you have a keli that the setup is you take either piece of boards or sham is also something that grows from the ground. And the purpose of it is, you want to have something which you could spread the begodim over it, and v'hamugmer mulmata, and you want to have like the psamim should be able to light the psamim under these begodim, basmu, in order for the begodim to receive the smell of the psamim. So it would be like something. Let's, for example, you have these things that you hang clothes on. So in other words, you have something to hang the clothes on, and then on the bottom you have something to put the mugmer there. So you have to put the mugmer there. So as I say, if it was made like a beehive, she'enli karka, it was like a kaveres, she'enli karka, which there's no bottom to it, and there's this a keli, which only has the top to be able to hang things on, and then you put the mugmer on the floor. You put the mugmer on the floor, so there's no real receptacle there. So therefore it's tar. So the keli is tar because there's no kli kibul. However, it's a kli eitz she'en also the kabbalah. However, if hoya base kibelis kisui, if we base kabbalah ksus, they fix it and those a keli, a receptacle to be able to put clothes in this contraption is harezeh mekabel tumah. So that is mekabel tumah. Bekitzer, a kli eitz in order to mekabel tumah has to be royal kabbalah. So over here, if you're making this keli in order to put the gadim on it and then put the mugmer on it. So the question is, if there's a clay kibble to be makabel the begadim, and just to spread the begadim on top, that's not called a clay kibble. Mashenkin, if it has a clay kibble, so then it's considered something that's makabel tumah. Now sandal shel behem. Now a keli of a behem is not makabel tumah. Only a keli of a person. But the sandal of a behemoth, Isis is sometimes used to drink from. It depends. If it's made out of metal, if the sandal, the shoe of the behemoth is made out of metal, so then it's possible to drink from it. Mashenkin, if it's made out of sham, which is a material, it's again a material that goes from the ground, but on the other end, it's not something that's like moss to drink from it if a behemoth uses it, so then people wouldn't drink from it, so therefore it's not considered a receptacle. That's the din. Halacha zayin. Sandal shel behemoth, shel mateches, if it's made out of metal, is tummy. And the reason why it's tummy is not out sandal, but also a drinking vessel, a utensil. It's not considered a klei kabbalah. Halacha ches. Hatzer margolis ba'er. A person, he wraps a diamond in hide, in leather, and then he takes the diamond out. Lepel, since he put it into the leather, so lepel, the device is the leather stretched a little bit for the diamond, and memela now in the leather there's like a place where it can receive the diamond, so to speak. It's like a receptacle. The nishar became amok, the place where it was there became deeper. In other words, it became deeper. You have a piece of leather. It's not a straight piece of leather anymore. It's a deep piece of leather. So the din is hareza mekabel tumah. So it's mekabel tumah achi yifshet, until it becomes straightened out. In other words, at this point in time, since there is a place for it to be a receptacle, so memela it's considered a receptacle. Shekol klei kibul mekabel mekolshim, as we said before, that as long as it's a klei kibul, so it's something that could receive this diamond, it's mekolshu, so memela it's mekabel tumah. Vari mekemon can make his cotton, the place where the diamond was, and over there was stretched into the leather. It was pushed into the leather. Is like a small pocket. Is like a small kiss. That's talking about when you're dealing with a diamond. A diamond is like something which goes into the leather and creates that type of a pouch in the leather. I will say Ramois, if you have money in this pouch in leather and you wrap it around. So even though maybe temporarily there's like a certain mold to the money, but nevertheless it's not going to really this. Doesn't have a tsuras keli. In other words, it's just like because over here we're talking about a small piece of diamond which like extended into the leather, went into the leather, so it stretched the leather, and now it became like a little pouch within the leather. Masha'inka, when you wrap around money, so even maybe it has a little of the shape of the money at this point in time, but that's something which is very temporary, and it'll very soon become like a regular piece of leather, and therefore it doesn't have a din of a keli.